We are on an epic quest to make everything on the question page truly dynamic. In the design, each question can get up and down voted, but this doesn't work yet. And the vote count, +6, is hard-coded in the template. To get this working, let's add a new votes property to the question entity. When a user clicks the up button, we will increase the votes. When they click down, we'll decrease it. In the future, when we have a true user authentication system, we could make this smarter by recording who is voting and preventing someone from voting multiple times. But our simpler plan will work great for now. Step 1. Add a new field to the entity. We could do this by hand by copying an existing property, adjusting the options, and then adding getter and setter methods for it. But it's easier just to run make entity. At your terminal, run bin console make:entity. Once again, I could use Symfony console, and I probably should. But since this command doesn't need the database environment variables, bin console also works. This time, enter question so that we can update the entity. Yeah, make entity can also be used to modify an entity. Add a new field called votes, make it an integer type, and set it to not nullable in the database. Hit enter to finish. Okay, let's go check out the question entity. It looks exactly like we expected. A votes property and, at the bottom, get votes and set votes methods. Let's generate the migration for this. Symfony console make:migration so that the Symfony binary can inject the environment variables. When this finishes, I like to double check the migration to make sure it doesn't contain any surprises. This looks perfect. Execute it with Symfony console doctrine::migrations::migrate. Beautiful. But this did break one little thing. Go to /questions/new, our endpoint to create a new question. And whoa! There's an exception coming from the database. Integrity constraint violation, column votes cannot be null. Yeah, that makes sense. We didn't set the votes property, so it's trying to create a new row with null for that column. What we probably want to do is default votes to be 0. How can we set a default value for a column in Doctrine? Actually, that's not really the right question to ask. A better question would be, how can we default the value of a property in PHP? And the answer to that is simple. In question, just say private votes equals 0. It's that easy. Now, when we instantiate a question object, votes will be 0. And when it saves to the database, the votes column will be 0 instead of null. There is actually a way inside the @orm/column annotation to specifically set the default value of the column in the database, but I've never used it. Setting the default value on the property works beautifully. Hit the URL again, and it works. Back in the entity, scroll down to get votes. The return type of this method is a nullable integer. It was generated that way because there was no guarantee that the votes property would ever be set. It was possible for votes to be null in PHP. But thanks to the change we just made, we can now remove the question mark. We know that this will always be an integer. Before we hook up the voting functionality, let's render the vote count. To make this more interesting, because all of the questions in the database right now have 0 votes, let's set a random vote number for new questions. In Question Controller, scroll up to the New action. Near the bottom, add question arrow set votes, and pass a random number from -20 to 50. Back on the browser, I'll refresh /questions/new a few times to get some fresh data. Copy the new slug and put that into the address bar to view the new question. Rendering the true vote count should be easy. Open up templates/question/show.html.twig. Find the vote number plus 6 and replace it with question.votes. That's good, boring code. Back at the browser, when we refresh, nice! This has -10 votes. It must not be a great question. Because the vote is negative, it naturally has a minus sign next to it. But that won't be there for a positive number. Let me create another question that will hopefully have a positive vote number. Yes! When it's positive, it's just 10, not plus 10. But our designer actually does want positive vote numbers to have a plus sign. No problem. We could add some extra twig logic. If the number is positive, then add a plus sign before printing the votes. There's nothing wrong with having simple logic like this in Twig. But if there is another place that we could put that logic, that's usually better. In this case, we could add a new method to the question entity itself, a method that returns the string representation of the vote count, complete with the plus and minus signs. That would keep the logic out of Twig and even make that code reusable. Heck, we could also unit test it. Check it out. Inside the question entity, it doesn't matter where, but I'll put it right after get votes so that it's next to related methods. Add public function get votes string with a string return type. Inside, I'll paste some logic. This first determines the prefix, the plus or minus sign, and then adds that before the number, using the absolute function to avoid two minus signs for negative numbers. In other words, this returns the exact string we want. How nice is that? Easy to read and reusable. To use it in Twig, we can say question.voteSstring. That's it. Let's try it. Over on the browser, refresh, and there it is, plus 10. The cool thing about this is that we said question.voteSstring. But there is no voteSstring property inside of question. And that's fine. When we say question.voteSstring, Twig is smart enough to call the getVotesString method. Now that we're printing the vote number, let's make it possible to click these up and down vote buttons. This will be the first time we execute an update query. And we'll get to talk more about smart entity methods. That's all next.